Hello everyone, welcome back to the World Conflict Monitor. Please subscribe and like my videos. Today we're diving into a serious escalation, the crisis in Minsk, where reports suggest the army is turning against the regime. The big question: who controls Belarus now? We're going to walk through the situation in a structured way. Consider this like a review of this conflict scenario, though it's obviously not a product. We'll look at the exterior context, what's the regime, what's at stake, the interior, deep inside what's happening. This one's a big section. Performance, how actors, military, political, opposition are acting, what is working / what's failing, safety features, what safeguards, risks. Stability, mechanisms exist, unique selling points in a metaphorical sense. What makes this situation significant / unique globally, regionally, price of what's being paid, human costs, geopolitical costs, and finally a conclusion. Exterior. On the surface, Belarus has been led for decades by Alexander Lukashenko, often described as Europe's last dictatorship. The regime has maintained power through suppression of dissent, control of the media, and an alliance with Russia. Belarus has played a strategic role in regional security because of its geography and its ties with Russia. Recent months have seen growing pressure from Western sanctions, from domestic discontent, from fears that Belarus is sliding even further into Russian orbit and losing autonomy. The rebel whisper that the army might be shifting allegiances, or at least cracks, may be showing in Minsk, adds to the sense that the exterior facade of control is under strain. Interior, inside Belarus, the dynamics are complex and intensifying. To begin, we look at the regime's internal structure. Lukashenko remains in power, supported by the state security services, the army, and a network of loyalists. Yet the economy is under stress, civil society is under heavy surveillance, and the opposition is exiled or suppressed. The 2022 constitutional referendum allowed amendments enabling the deployment of nuclear weapons on Belarusian soil and extended powers of the presidential office and of the newly empowered People's Assembly. These institutional moves show that the regime is preparing for long-term entrenchment, yet the underlying foundations are showing cracks. Turning to the alleged turning of the army, while independent confirmation remains thin, there are credible signs of military frustration and potential for internal rifts. For example, analysts note that most low-ranked Belarusian soldiers opposed participating in the war in Ukraine, and that logistical units were operating in support roles, but not actively engaged in front-line fighting. The regime's reliance on Russian strategic drills, such as Zapad 2025, illustrates the increasing blurring of distinction between Belarusian national forces and Russian control. On the opposition side, there's both internal protest, though repressed, and external activism. Sabotage, for instance, at the rail network and underground organization. Within the elite, there are signs of anxiety. The regime must balance between Russian demands, military alignment, and internal legitimacy, domestic stability, all while avoiding total Russian absorption. Analysts have argued that Belarus is in a sovereignty crisis, trapped between serving Russian interests and trying to assert its independent statehood. As for the army's role, the military has for decades dressed in regiment uniform, paraded in Minsk, but the deeper questions are, who do they answer to? Are they loyal solely to Lukashenko, or to Russia, or to the Belarusian people? The alleged rumor of army turning against regime suggests that loyalty might be shifting, even if partially, or that some units are hedging their bets. If this is true, the interior picture is one of latent fragmentation. The security apparatus is not monolithic, the leadership is feeling heat, the population is uneasy, and external pressures from Russia and the West compound the instability. Moreover, internal repression has been used to suppress dissent, but that also builds resentment and alternative networks. The regime's use of propaganda, control of civil society, and crackdown on political prisoners has helped maintain control, but also at a heavy cost in legitimacy. Within the armed forces, there may be two conflicting dynamics. One, the professional military security complex that remains loyal for career patronage reasons. Two, less loyal or disenfranchised units and soldiers who could shift allegiance or become passive. The regime cannot afford open dissent in the armed forces, but the cost of maintaining loyalty is growing. Also inside Belarus, the military cooperation with Russia is deepening. Joint exercises, integrated command structures, planning for nuclear weapons deployment, all of which reduces Belarus's independent decision-making and may antagonize portions of the military and the population who feel becoming a mere Russian vassal. In summary, the interior of Belarus is marked by a fragile regime propped up by force and alliance, facing internal stress, an evolving military role, and the possibility of cracks in the unity of the security apparatus. Performance when assessing how this crisis is performing, meaning how effectively the regime, opposition, military, and external actors are executing their strategies, a number of points stand out. The regime has so far performed well in terms of survival. Lukashenko remains in power, opposition remains constrained, and Russia remains committed enough to support him. The heavy security and media control mean major uprisings have been suppressed. But performance is showing signs of decline. The economy is stagnating, sanctions bite, demographic and emigration issues press, and loyalty is less assured. Meanwhile, the opposition and external actors EU, US have performed in limited ways. Sanctions, diplomatic pressure, public condemnation, but limited avenues for internal change. The military's performance is key. Belarus has demonstrated willingness to host and integrate with Russian military infrastructure, joint exercises, and logistics. That performance appeals to Russia, but may compromise Belarus's national interest. From the military side, readiness appears high for joint Russian-Belarus operations, but morale, national legitimacy, and independent action may be weaker. In the metaphorical review sense, the actors are doing the job of maintaining control and projecting strength, but the underlying reliability, resilience, and adaptability are weakening. If the army truly begins to shift away from the regime, the performance of the regime may degrade rapidly. So far, the system is holding, but with visible stress. Safety features in a state of crisis. Safety features means what safeguards, institutions, mechanisms exist to prevent collapse, chaos, uncontrolled breakdown, or external takeover. In Belarus's case, some safety features include the security services KGB, interior troops which act as a buffer, the military aligned with both the regime and Russia, physical control of territory, suppression of large-scale protest infrastructure, control of media and narrative, the regime capacity to lean on Russia for a safety net. On the external front, Belarus remains part of the Russia-Belarus Union state, giving it strategic protection from Western military action. Similarly, Russia's nuclear umbrella extends to Belarus, which may deter adversaries. Institutional safety features include the constitutionally amended powers, the All-Belarusian People's Assembly, empowered in the 2024 gathering, making the regime more resilient institutionally. But there are risk features too. The heavy reliance on Russia may undermine independent decision-making, the repression feeds resentment, the economy is vulnerable, the military loyalty is less certain, and external border tensions with Poland and the Baltic states increase the chance of escalation. Analysts say Belarus is in a sovereignty crisis. The safety net might be weakening. In summary, there are multiple safety features built into the regime, but they may be eroding, and the potential for fallback or failure grows. Unique selling points in a conflict review context. This means what makes this scenario especially important or unique on the global stage. First, Belarus is strategically positioned between Russia, Ukraine, and the EU/NATO border region. Its stability or instability has outsized consequences for European security. Second, the alleged turning of the Belarusian army against the regime if true, would represent one of the rare occasions in authoritarian post-Soviet states where the military begins to question the regime that alone is unique and potentially precedent-setting. Third, the deepening integration with Russia in military and strategic terms, including hosting of nuclear weapons and joint drills such as Zapad 2025, makes Belarus less a neutral actor and more a pivot point in East vs West geopolitics. Fourth, the internal structure of Belarus' rigid authoritarianism facing modern pressures, a population divided, a regime tied to but distinct from Russia, offers a case study in how authoritarian regimes evolve, survive, or collapse in the 21st century. Fifth, the story is unfolding in real time, meaning the who controls Belarus now. Question is not purely academic, but has immediate, measurable impacts on migration, on border tensions Poland/Belarus, on Russia's strategy in Ukraine, on European policy. Because of all this crisis is more than local, it could reshape regional alignments. Price, as with any major conflict or regime crisis, there is a cost. Human cost, political prisoners, repression, forced migration, lives lost in the surrounding war. Belarus has provided staging ground for Russian operations in Ukraine, economic cost, sanctions, isolation, dependency on Russia, border closures with neighbors like Poland. Geopolitical cost, sovereignty erosion, Belarus increasingly seen as subordinate to Russia, risk of becoming a frontline in a larger East-West conflict, loss of independence. Domestic legitimacy cost, the regime is investing heavily in suppression and military alignment instead of domestic welfare, which may erode long-term stability. Military cost, the army's involvement in Russian-aligned operations or potential internal fracture can degrade readiness, morale, and national defense capability. Strategic cost, Belarus's choice may limit its maneuvering room between East and West the more it tilts, the fewer options it has. So the price of this crisis is high, for the Belarusian people, for the region, for the regime itself. Conclusion: so, where do things stand and what does it all mean? The crisis in Minsk is not yet a full collapse of the regime, but the signs are unmistakable. A regime under mounting internal and external pressure, an army whose absolute loyalty is no longer assured, a geopolitical environment where Belarus's sovereignty is being tested, and regional stakes that make this more than a local scuffle. Who controls Belarus now? Officially, Alexander Lukashenko's regime remains in command, but unofficially, the power is contested. The military, tied to Russia and yet rooted in Belarus, is a wild card. The opposition remains suppressed, but the underground and external pressure continue. Russia holds significant influence, but Belarus might not be a passive tool. Elements within may push back or seek alternatives. The real control is therefore fragmented, regime plus security services for now, but with growing uncertainty. For viewers of the larger conflict map, Belarus is a pivot. Stability here matters for Ukraine, for Poland and the Baltics, for European security. Keep an eye on the army's posture, internal loyalty in Minsk, border incidents, and any shift in Russian-Belarus strategy. If the military breaks definitively from the regime or parts of it do, that could trigger cascading effects across the region. Thank you for watching this deep review of the crisis in Belarus. If you found this helpful, please subscribe, like, and share. Stay tuned for more updates and insights.